welcome all of you to our candidate forum for state's attorney. We appreciate you taking the interest in this, and we certainly appreciate our candidates in coming out today so we have a better opportunity to meet them and get to know them a little bit. This candidate forum is sponsored by the Brookings Area Chamber of Commerce and the Government Affairs Committee. Today we have two candidates that are running for one Brookings County State's Attorney position, and we're going to have them introduce themselves first. We'll give them 2 minutes for introductions, and then we have a prepared list of questions. Since the state's attorney is kind of a unique position, and we want to make sure that the questions are appropriate for the position, we did a little research and made sure that we found questions that will probably be indicative of what they will face later. And so I think it'll give you a good idea of what these people will do in their position if elected. So our first candidate is Abigail Howard, and our second candidate is Dan Nelson. And we have one position available for state's attorney, and we're going to let each candidate have 2 minutes to introduce themselves, and then we'll move on to prepared questions. So we'll start with Abigail Howard.
I want to start by thanking the Chamber for hosting this forum, to Carrie for moderating, and to those of you for joining us today, and those of you watching the rebroadcast at home. We truly appreciate this opportunity and your interest. In 2015, Brookings was named the number 12 safest city in America and the number 1 safest college town in America. I want you to stop for a moment and consider the work that goes into making that safety happen. Now, we all know that the vital efforts of law enforcement in our community are critical to that safety, but another office that plays an important role is the state's attorney's office. Brookings County needs an experienced hand at the wheel when steering the safety of our community, and we've had that for the past 42 years under the direction of Clyde Calhoun. I have the experience, the knowledge, and the leadership necessary to continue those efforts for years to come. I have the experience. Now, earning my bachelor's degree from SDSU and earning my Juris Doctorate from USD Law, I actually started in private practice here in Brookings, and I was given the opportunity to join the state's attorney's office as a deputy in 2013 when Mark Cradaville retired. And then in 2015, I was promoted to the position of chief deputy state's attorney. I have literally handled every aspect that there is in our office, whether it be making coffee and filing files, to handling and managing our budget, all the way to prosecuting felony jury trials. Additionally, I have the knowledge base. Not only have I worked in the state's attorney's office since 2013, but I've been a lifetime resident of Brookings County. Growing up in Volga, attending SDSU, the only time I've been away from this county is for 3 years to attend law school. After law school, my husband Lance, a Brookings native, and I returned to Brookings knowing that this is where we wanted to live and raise our family. And I'm proud to say that we live here in Brookings with our son Truman, and we plan to continue living here for years to come. I have that institutional memory of understanding where we've been and where we need to go. And finally, I have the leadership. I have learned early on in my career that to be a state's attorney means being just, fair, and ethical. It means making the tough decisions because that is what is best for the safety of our community. You need a state's attorney that's prepared and qualified to make those hard decisions. So my experience, my knowledge, and my leadership as your next state's attorney will ensure that the level of safety that you have come to know and expect in this county will continue.
Thank you. I'll let you know that I talked to both candidates and asked them how I could refer to them, and so I will be hence referring to Abigail as Abby and Dan as Dan. So it's Dan's turn. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you all for attending this morning and those that are watching on TV. I also want to thank the Chamber and the Government Affairs Committee for putting on what I hope today is a conversation about crime here in Brookings County and the important role that the state's attorney plays in that. But before I begin, I want to take a moment and thank Clyde Calhoun. You know, Clyde Calhoun is really an icon in South Dakota and certainly an exemplary public servant that I think has really done a lot for this community and certainly has has played an important part in public service. Him and I may disagree on who should be the next Brookings County State's Attorney, but I think one thing that him and I can agree on is the importance of public service. And so I want to thank him for his 42 years of service. In today's world, more and more is required of a state's attorney. And a state's attorney must lead inside and outside the courtroom. You know, a state's attorney can sit back and say crime happens, sit in our office and wait for police reports to come in. But that simply isn't good enough anymore. We need a new approach, a proactive approach that engages the community and prevents crime before it occurs. And really the important question facing this election and the state's attorney's position is, are we making active efforts to prevent crime before it occurs? You know, the easy job for a state's attorney is to prosecute in court. That's what state's attorneys across this state do every day. It's what I do every day. But what I'm also doing, and what I've done in Beadle County, and what I want to start doing here in Brookings County, is, are we engaging the community actively to prevent crime before it occurs? Felony convictions, felony arrests are the highest in the last 5 years that they've ever been here in Brookings County. And so I think this election is an important crossroads for this office. Are we going to talk about preventing crime, or are we just going to talk about simply reacting to that crime? And I have a plan in place, what we've done in Beadle County. It's been successful, and those are things that I want to start here in Brookings County.
Thank you, Dan. So I'll remind everybody that this forum is being broadcast on Mediacom Channel 9 and Swiftel Communications and ITC channels, and will be replayed again tonight, Saturday from 9 till 10:30 p.m., Sunday from 2 to 3:30 p.m., and Monday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. So the process is that each of the candidates will get 2 minutes to answer a question. David is timing over there, and he will hold up a 15-second warning, and then he'll hold up a stop sign at the end of 2 minutes, and if you don't stop, then I'll interrupt and we'll kick you off. I'm sorry. It's the rules. I don't make them. So the first question, which will be directed to Dan first. What is your position on the status of county jail populations, and how does the state's attorney's office play a role?
Certainly, I think several outside influences are currently affecting jail populations across the state. When we talk about local jails here in South Dakota, especially here in Brookings County, I think we have to first talk about the cost shifting that the state is placing onto the counties. Counties are now being tasked with an increased burden of shouldering some of the weight of that cost shifting that the state has done through measures like Senate Bill 70 and Senate Bill 73. We talk about more felony offenders remaining in our community. 80% of all felonies here in South Dakota are presumptive probation. So we're talking about the Class 5, Class 6 felonies. And those are presumptive probation, meaning that they're going to stay here in our community. Brookings County sent 148, or there was 148 felony convictions here in Brookings County, and half of those went to the penitentiary and half of those were presumptive probation. And so we're talking about an increase in the local community population here for felony offenders. And I think that's one part of it, and we can certainly talk about the county's efforts to expand the jail here in Brookings County. But if we're really wanting to talk about the solution in terms of curbing some of that, the crime here in Brookings County that's causing our local jails to be crowded, and it goes back to my opening statement, which is, are we doing enough to curb the crime here in Brookings County? Are we engaging the community? Are we setting up an apparatus where felony offenders who the judge has not kept in the community, or has kept in the community, are we doing enough to make sure that they can stay crime-free? And that's really where I think the heart of the issue is.
Thank you, Dan. Abby?
This is a great question, Carrie, and if you were here for the last forum, you heard our county commissioner candidates speak on this as well. I checked our inmate population list this morning, and currently we're at 49 out of 54 beds available. So we are getting to the point where we're reaching capacity, and that's a trend that I think we're going to see continue. Now, the great thing is Brookings County is already taking steps to work on this. I actually served on a subcommittee that interviewed architects for the expansion and remodel of our current jail facility. And I think that is a vital role that the state's attorney's office is playing, having that conversation, being part of the dialogue, and providing our input as to what direction we think that should go. And we're very lucky here to have an amazing county detention center guided by our sheriff and our jail administrator, and we're looking at these issues as they come. The state's attorney's office also can play a role when appropriate, looking at some of the bond alternatives. So a judge sets bond when someone goes to jail, but at times it may be appropriate where they can be released from incarceration with some pretrial detention alternatives, like the 24/7 program, the SCRAM program, GPS monitoring for those on house arrest. So what my office's role is to really look at the type of offender we're dealing with when we come to court. And I typically am the one that look at some of those first bonds on Monday morning with our magistrate judge and decide if this is someone that's a low-level risk, a low-level offender, is it appropriate and safe for them to be out in the community? And we can address some of those issues. And we're very lucky that our sheriff's office is on the forefront of looking at some of those resources. But there are times when we truly have people that are such a severe risk to the community that they absolutely do need to remain incarcerated. And I support that because I don't want anyone's safety in this community to be jeopardized. So I think it's critical that we continue having this conversation, continue looking at the resources we have. And then as the jail remodel and jail expansion process continues, I think we're going to see some alternatives, some options there that can address our growing needs.
Thank you, Abby. So the next question is, what major areas of crime do you see as concerns for the future of our community? And we'll start with Abby.
The number one concern that I talk about often, and it's something that we see in our office on a day-to-day basis, is the increasing level of drug trafficking and distribution in Brookings County. Now, again, we are already looking at addressing this issue. Brookings County has formed a drug task force that involves police officers, sheriff's deputies, DCI agents, and we are already making substantial progress in getting some of these big-time dealers, these high-level offenders, removed from the community by getting those solid arrests. So it's something we're looking at, but it's a concern, and often people don't realize how prevalent some of these controlled substances are, but I will tell you methamphetamine is a critical issue in Brookings right now. It's easy to get, and we've got big dealers that think they come in here. However, you are in the right hands now, and you will continue to be, because those dealers know that if they get busted in Brookings County, they're going to be held accountable. We've had some of the largest busts we've had in a while. We recently had a bust of 2 pounds of meth and 4 pounds of heroin, which is almost approximately $500,000 street value in drugs. And because of the volume, that case ended up being prosecuted federally, but we're making those steps. We're getting to the top of the chain. But that is an area we definitely need to continue working on, and I feel that those cases should be prosecuted strongly. Additionally, and again, this was talked about in the last hour, but mental health resources, chemical dependency resources, and the crimes that can result thereof is just a critical issue right now that we need to have the conversation about. I think this is a really hot topic right now in our community in that everyone's having this conversation. It's no longer something that's taboo to talk about. It's something that we all recognize is an issue and we haven't come up with a solution for. So I've been part of many of the work groups and committees that have been meeting with our providers, with the hospital, with law enforcement. And frankly, I think the solution is we don't have enough resources. So we will continue to have that conversation and look at a statewide level to address that issue.
Thank you, Abby. Dan?
Yeah, I certainly agree that the drug issue here in Brookings County is clearly the leading concern, but I think where my opponent and I differ is how to attack that problem. I mean, certainly cracking down and holding distributors accountable to the fullest extent of the law is something I've done in Beadle County since I've been there and something that I will continue to do. But does it stop there? Do we have to wait and seize that much meth and heroin? Or can we take proactive efforts to attack both the distributor, but the other part of it is the user? If you curb the use, can you curb the distribution? And I think they're interrelated. And I think that's where my opponent and I differ, in that you can be proactive about the use. I mean, what do we know about drug users? We often know that they're unemployed, they're uneducated, and they lack proper housing. And if a state's attorney is concerned about curbing the use of methamphetamine, prescription drugs here in our community, I think it's incumbent on the state's attorney to be proactive with the business community. Can we employ these offenders on felony probation here in our community? Can we employ the parolees who are coming back to the penitentiary? And the reason I'm talking about these two individuals, the felony probationer and the parolee, is because these are the individuals that are most likely to continue using drugs. These are the individuals that are posing the most significant risk to our community. And so as state's attorney, you have to target that problem. And if you're reaching out to the business community and that person has a full-time job and he's using that job then to pay rent at an apartment, or he's bettering himself educationally, these are proactive efforts that a state's attorney can organize without costing the taxpayers any money, something Mr. Moore and I have done in Beadle County and something that I think should be done here in Brookings County. And that's really where we're going to target and curb the drug use. And if you curb the drug use, you certainly can curb the distribution.
Thank you, Dan. Our next question deals with your administrative capabilities, and it is, what has been your experience in handling the administration of an office, and what is your position on managing the budget of a state's attorney's office? And we'll start with Dan.
Certainly in Beadle County, currently, I work with 2 legal assistants and 1 victim witness coordinator, and so I co-manage those individuals. And then outside of the office, I also assist in advising the other agencies in the county, whether that's the sheriff's office, the treasurer's office, the auditor's office, help negotiate their wages and benefits with the union. We also co-advise those other agencies with budget issues. Those are all things that I've been involved in since being the deputy state's attorney in Beadle County for the last 3 years. And so certainly I do have the experience of managing personnel not only in my office, but assisting other agencies in the county. I mean, the state's attorney plays a unique role in a county in that we can often assist and advise other agencies with legal matters and certainly personnel issues as well. And so I do have experience in that.
Thank you, Dan. Abby?
I just have to address the last point. I've had a lot of conversations with parole officers and probation officers in our community, and their concern is not about the people that they supervise getting jobs and houses. It's about getting enough resources for chemical dependency and mental health issues. And if you've had anyone in your life with a chemical dependency or a mental health issue, I think you can agree with me that that is a need in Brookings County. In terms of managing the office, I've actually been lucky enough that since I started at the state's attorney's office, under Clyde's supervision and final okay, I handled all of the administrative roles. I do our budget each year. I handle all of the personnel issues, the hiring, the evaluations. I handle our office trust account. I pay all the bills, claims, and expenses. Additionally, I have started regular staff meetings to provide guidance to our 4 legal assistants and our victim witness coordinator. In terms of the budget, that's something that we take very seriously in our office. Our budget is your tax dollars, my tax dollars. So every cent we spend, we cherish. And that's something we look at very closely each year. A project that I'm currently working on is trying to convert our office into as paperless an office as it can be. And that's something where we know down the road that's going to be significant tax savings to you as the taxpayer. That's something that we're going to look at on the forefront. I've already invested really all we need to be doing to get to that point. But we know that if that saves you money down the road, then that's funds that can be spent elsewhere in the county. And additionally, I think it increases the efficiency and the economical process of our office. If my staff can move faster, then they can process more cases for you. So these are things that I'm already experienced doing, I've been doing for the past 4 years, and when starting as your next state's attorney, there will be absolutely no lapse or no hiccup, no gap in the process. I'm just going to continue doing my job.
Thank you, Abby. So the next question, as you know, the state has been working very hard through the governor and his proposals to address reform of the criminal justice system. And so we're going to start with Abby on this one. What have you seen as the pros and cons of the criminal justice reform in South Dakota?
Certainly. Now, many of you have probably followed the Public Safety Improvement Act that was passed in 2013, and really that was large criminal justice reform for the state of South Dakota. And in theory, it's great in concept. Let's help low-level offenders by keeping them locally in the community, not send them to the penitentiary, less tax dollars overall. Great in theory, not necessarily working out as great in practice. I would say the one major benefit, or my key aspect that's come out of the reform, is the specialty courts that have been introduced across South Dakota. Brookings County started our drug court in 2016, this year, excuse me. And I'm proud to say that I jumped on board as the prosecutor and said, I'm ready to spearhead this team. And it's been the most rewarding experience. When you talk about curbing a user, that's how you curb a user. You find someone that's a lifetime addict, has not been able to get out of the cycle, and you say, we have an alternative solution for you. And right now we have 3 participants in the Brookings County Drug Court, and I'll tell you that every week that I get to work with them is a blessing. It's an inspiration to me to see them recover from their addictions and to help them through that process. But overall, this reform has really been a struggle for prosecutors, to be honest with you. What has essentially happened is that these low-level offenders stay within the community, don't get sent to the penitentiary where they may have before, but yet we don't have those additional resources to help them. So yes, they're back here on probation, maybe they serve some county jail time, but as I mentioned, we just don't have enough mental health and chemical dependency resources to keep them back on track. So they might continue to use, they might continue to commit crimes because of their use or because of other reasons. And essentially, we're not helping to break the cycle for that person, for their family, for the person that lives next to them that got their house burglarized. There are still concerns. And that's partly the way that the bill was structured and the way that probation and parole are guided to proceed. But I think there needs to be more work there. And we're lucky in that I think the state is starting to have that conversation. I believe there's a work group right now looking at it. But that's something that's going to need some work. This is not a cured problem.
Thank you, Abby. Dan?
Well, yeah, and so then the question becomes, well, what's the state's attorney going to do in the interim then? I mean, the state's attorneys and law enforcement have been complaining and, certainly expressing our concerns to the governor, but what are we going to do right now about it? Are we going to complain that we don't have enough resources locally, or are we going to get involved with our community? And frankly, I completely disagree with my opponent in that parole and probation isn't saying that jobs and housing is an issue with their parolees and probationers. I mean, you talk to parole agents and probation court services, and it is absolutely an issue, and it continues to be an issue. And so can we take active efforts right now, starting January 1st, to put a program into place that's not going to cost the taxpayers any money, that's going to allow these criminal offenders to get a full-time job for the first time in their entire life? See, in drug court, we're seeing, and I've been the drug court team member in Beadle County for the last year, what we're seeing is that these drug offenders are maintaining full-time employment for the first time in their entire adult life. And so if we really want to get serious about curbing the drug problem, then we need to have that conversation. We're seeing drug offenders maintain a place to live for the first time in their adult life. And they're doing this, yes, with chemical dependency assistance and mental health treatment too, but they're also doing it by other avenues. And I think it takes a state's attorney, though, who's willing to have that conversation. Can we start talking about some of the preventative things that we can put into place that are going to prevent people from committing crimes and begin having that conversation? I've talked to a lot of community leaders here in Brookings County, and they agree. We need to do more to keep offenders from coming back into the system. And these are simple steps that we can take.
Thank you, Dan. This forum is being brought to you by the Brookings Area Chamber of Commerce through its Government Affairs Committee. And the next question will be addressed to Dan. How has the juvenile justice reform in South Dakota impacted prosecutors?
And it's similar to the adult criminal justice reform. Again, a law was changed where judges now don't have the ability. They have the ability, but it's not likely that they'll send as many kids to the DOC. Again, this was made to curb savings at the state level. We didn't want to incarcerate as many kids. South Dakota had one of the highest incarceration rates in the country, and the legislature and the governor felt that that needed to change. And so some of the changes that took effect are now that in order for a kid to be committed to DOC, he has to commit a qualifying offense, which is oftentimes a violent felony, or if he's being committed on a misdemeanor, he has to be proven to be a threat to others in society. And so what that's done is it's limited our ability as prosecutors to commit a child to DOC. And so, again, like the adult reform, it puts more strain on us locally. Do we have the local resources then to take care of these kids? And certainly, with my discussions with Senator Tiedemann, I mean, there are resources here in Brookings that are making a big difference. Teen Challenge is one of those programs where children are often placed into Teen Challenge, and it really has a positive effect. Recidivism is low after graduating from that program. And so those are the types of things that we need to continue to work towards as state's attorneys here locally, making sure that those types of programs are getting the emphasis that they need. And that's really, I think, how we can begin to see some of the pros of the juvenile justice program take place, is making sure that we have that community support at a local level. And I think certainly here in Brookings, we're fortunate to have those programs more so than other counties.
Thank you, Dan. Abby?
Thanks, Carrie. I can tell you that the juvenile justice reform was not something that Brookings County needed. I was trained by Mark Cradaville in the terms of juvenile prosecution, and that's what I started doing when I came to the state's attorney's office. And I can tell you that we utilized every resource possible before we went to the most extreme step of asking that a juvenile be committed to the Department of Corrections. The Teen Court program, not Teen Challenge, is our court approved juvenile diversion program. It was implemented in 2008 under Mark Cradaville and then Judge Gienap. And it's been an outstanding program, an amazing program that's been very beneficial to the youth in Brookings County. That is essentially an opportunity for youth to avoid the court system and go through their kind of one get out of jail free card. And they really have strict requirements under that. But since I've been at the state's attorney's office, I've been pretty proactive with the community in terms of preventing juvenile crime. When I started, I implemented regular meetings within the school district and our school resource officers. I also started regular meetings with, this is a different avenue, but the Department of Social Services and CASA, and sometimes those cases can overlap. And that's something that our current deputy, Terry Nesvold, that handles our juvenile matters, has continued. We have these conversations in the community, and we are making the steps and the efforts to say, what can we be doing more to address it ahead of time? What's the proper avenue that we can look at if they do commit these infractions? But this new juvenile justice reform has essentially crippled any discretion that the prosecutor or the judge has in helping these youth. So instead of saying, we've utilized all the resources we have in the community, we can't help you like we need to, but the state has the resources and they can. Now we can't do that, and they have to stay in the community, and they just continue to go through the cycle, and if we can't help them, it doesn't matter. We've lost that control, that ability to help them further. So it's a frustration. Just last night, Terry and I got a call on some juvenile issues that have been through the system multiple times, and again, it's something that we're going to continue to work on and have a conversation about, but it's something that I don't believe is the best fit for Brookings County.
Thank you, Abby. As you know, on the ballot, there is an initiated measure which would be an amendment to the Constitution, and it's called Marcy's Law, and it affects victims' rights to know. And so we want to know your opinion on Marcy's Law and how you support it or not. Abby, we'll start with you.
Certainly. Well, I'll let you know that I am currently the co-leader of the Eastern Plains Sexual Assault Response Team. That's a task force that convenes monthly, and we, my office, and other agencies in the criminal justice realm look at our response to sexual assaults, domestic violence cases, how we're best addressing victims' needs, how we can better that response for victims. Marcy's Law is not something that I support. This is an amendment that is so broadly written that it is going to completely stifle your county level resources. We currently have a part-time victim witness coordinator in our office, and she does an outstanding job. But she's able to do that and then also be basically a part-time legal assistant. And I will tell you, neither of those are really part-time. She's kind of filling 2 full-time roles, so she's an outstanding person. But with this change in law, we would need to hire another full-time staff person, so you're going to see increased staff dollars just to comply with the mandates within the amendment. It essentially broadens the definition of a victim so extensively that the victim of a rape or a sexual assault requires the same notification and information as your average grocer who had a carton of milk stolen. And I will tell you, we work with everyone that's impacted by a crime, whether you just need restitution, you just need an update on a case that you were involved in. We never decline those services, but certainly a victim of rape, I hope we can all understand, would require more extensive time and resources and work from our office because those cases are much more complex. So I believe that this amendment is too broadly written. I don't think it's what we need here in South Dakota. We currently have in statute the Crime Victims' Rights Act, which does outline all of the rights that are allowed to victims. It's very extensive. My office currently goes above and beyond what's required by statute, I can tell you that. We have worked very closely on our policy for victims' rights. But I also think it's another risk to the county in that I see additional litigation costs in our future. If someone believes that their constitutional rights are violated, they have the right to sue the county, and that's going to be your tax dollars paying to defend that. So I support victims' rights, but I don't support this amendment.
Thank you, Abby. Dan?
Yeah, I would certainly echo those same concerns. We're talking about a law then that makes it constitutionally required then for victims to make sure that they have notice, make sure that they are free from harassment, that they have privacy rights. Those are all things that are important, and certainly as a proponent of victim rights, I can support those things. But in terms of some of the costs that will be associated with this law, we're talking about some of the bigger offices in Minnehaha, Pennington, Brown County. Those offices will certainly incur an enormous cost. But if the law passes and we're faced with the issue implementing Marcy's Law here in South Dakota, or rather Brookings County, I'm confident that your taxpayer dollars will not be affected. I think a lot of what I've read in the law is what we're doing currently in Beadle County. And these are things that are currently in place that we're already doing. And so the smaller offices like Brookings County, like Beadle County, they're not going to see the type of increase in cost associated with Marcy's Law. These are things that we can and already are doing locally in the smaller offices. And so I'm confident that there won't be a stifling of county resources if Marcy's Law passes.
Thank you, Dan. So this forum is limited to 45 minutes, and we have about 10 minutes left. So we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll allow the candidates to wrap up for 2 minutes before we conclude. So the next question, which will be addressed to Dan first, is what has been your experience with domestic violence cases?
I have extensive experience in domestic violence cases. I've handled domestic violence ever since I began prosecuting in Beadle County. I've handled the investigation all the way through a jury trial for domestic violence. And if you talk to any prosecutor, whether it's here in South Dakota or across the country, domestic violence is probably the most difficult case a prosecutor will ever face. We're often confronted with the issue of an uncooperative victim who wants to recant oftentimes, and this is due to the power and control that is exercised by her abuser over the victim. And these are things that make it incredibly challenging as a prosecutor to bring a case forward. And it takes a state's attorney, though, who has the experience and certainly the type of know-how with domestic violence. I think what I've done, or what I've at least tried to do as a prosecutor facing domestic violence, is it's important to constantly keep that victim engaged in the process. Whether it's the morning after the arrest, am I talking with her about what happened? What resources can my office provide you in terms of helping you through this process? And then the victim witness coordinator reaching out to her, keeping her involved, or him involved with the process. Where is the case at? And then, are we working with the domestic violence shelter? Anytime we're talking about domestic violence, it truly is a team effort. It's not just the prosecutor. It's not just the victim witness coordinator or some of the other resources that's available to a domestic violence victim. It's really a team effort. And that's what I've tried to do. I've tried to do my best to sit down with that victim throughout the entire case, make myself available to him or her. And really, that's, I think, probably the best way to handle domestic violence. And it's certainly a challenge, but I'm committed to being a strong advocate for domestic violence victims here in Brookings County.
Thank you, Dan. Abby?
Well, I just want to point out that I really don't classify the Brookings County State's Attorney's Office as a small prosecutor's office. I don't know how they feel in Beetle, but we have a significant number of cases each year. I think our case filings last year were double that of Beetle. So we're looking at very different sized offices. And one thing that's constant in our office is the domestic violence cases. Just going to share with you a story. I had a victim of a simple assault domestic case, and it was apparent from the reports that she had been through a lifetime of this type of behavior and was very immersed in the cycle. And I was worried about how she would proceed with the case. So I had her come in and visit with me and Susie, our victim witness assistant. And I also asked the DCI victim witness coordinator to join us because she has a wealth of experience. We talked with her about what was going on and about the case. And she said to me that I can't proceed with this case. I can't help testify because if he doesn't come home, who pays the bills? I can't survive without him. There are so many components to domestic violence, and I think we as the community have to be willing to take that broader look and look at the relationships of our friends and our families and our neighbors, and I think you'd be surprised to see how prevalent domestic violence is. These cases are a real challenge. They are. That case that I referred to ended up getting resolved, and then probably about a month later, I had an exact same case with those individuals. It's a cycle. It's a vicious cycle, and getting your victim to see beyond that cycle is one of the most difficult things for a prosecutor or any of us involved in the system to do. Thankfully, I am on the EPSART team here in town. I'm a co-leader, and we work very closely with the Brookings Domestic Abuse Shelter. We've formed relationships where I know I can contact them if I say, hey, I really think this person needs an advocate in their corner, if they haven't already been contacted, which they usually have been. Or we can look at what's the best outcome in this case. We always want to hold offenders accountable. I always want to make sure they know there's a consequence for their actions. But at the end of the day, the safety of the victim is probably the number one thing I'm looking at. What type of situation are we sending them home to, and is it going to be safe? So it's a tough situation, but it's something we as a community need to be having a bigger conversation about.
Thank you, Abby. We have time for one more question, and then we'll allow each of the candidates a final statement. So we'll start with Abby. And what is the biggest challenge for prosecutors in achieving just outcomes in cases?
You know, this is really a continuation off my last comment. Domestic violence cases are probably some of the toughest cases that we have. And when you have to drop a charge down to get a conviction, or if it ends up getting dismissed, that's a real challenge to accept as a prosecutor, because you feel like you're not getting justice. But if that's how the victim feels safe and that's how you have to proceed, at times that's what happens. And the same can be held true at times for child victims. Now, hopefully, those are cases that are rock solid and you can get good convictions on people that choose to either physically or sexually abuse children. But there are times when children have a very hard time testifying, and maybe they have a hard time disclosing what has happened to them. And so those can be challenges in making sure you're getting the right outcome for that offender, but you're also getting the right outcome for the juvenile. I'll just share one little anecdote. When I first started, I had an abuse and neglect case, and Mr. Cradaville, before he left, told me, Abby, this is probably the worst abuse and neglect case we've ever had. And I had that child victim testify against her parents because we had to proceed with the case. And when we were going through the hearing, I stood between the child while she was testifying and her line of sight with the parent, so she didn't have to look them in the eye while she was testifying. And the case proceeded, and she since is in a safer place now. But the one thing she recollects to other people that she's been working with when they say, well, do you remember the hearing? Do you remember Abby? She says, yeah, I do. She's the one that stood between me and my parents. She stood up for me. And that's how I know that sometimes, even if you don't get the exact conviction you want, if you're helping the victims, if you're giving them a safe outcome, that's why we do what we do. That's why I'm a prosecutor, and that's why I know that at the end of the day, that is our commitment to public safety.
Thank you, Abby. Dan?
Yeah, I think this is one of the more important questions today, because I think it really explains why we have an election for state's attorney. And we make a lot of important decisions every day, whether that's a plea agreement, whether that's a decision to charge. Those decisions happen every day in a state's attorney's office. And it isn't necessarily the obstacle of obtaining justice in a case, because justice happens every day in our office. Every day someone is convicted of a crime in court. I mean, that's justice happening. But I think the real question is, each one of us in this room has a different opinion of what justice is. And at the end of the day, after I've made my decision, I have to be able to justify that decision. And that's why we have an election. I'm held accountable every 4 years for the decisions that I make every day. And if I can't justify that decision to you all, if you walk into my office, then I shouldn't be your state's attorney. And that's what I'm committed to doing if I'm elected on November 8th for the Brookings County State's Attorney, is that every decision I make, I will be able to justify it to you all. And that's really the important part of this position. And that, I think, is probably the most challenging thing that we encounter in making sure that justice happens every day in our office.
Thank you. We will allow each candidate a 2-minute final statement, and we'll begin with Dan.
Well, I should have began with this, but I'm a third-generation Brookings County resident. I was born and raised on a family farm outside of Elkton, along with my 6 siblings. My grandpa actually moved to Elkton in the early 1950s, and he was a chiropractor in Elkton for over 40 years, and he had a little practice on Main Street there. And I went on to graduate from SDSU in 2008 with a double major in political science and journalism, and I knew that public service was something that I wanted to do. I tried to get into the military. I was medically disqualified, but that yearning for public service was still burning inside of me. And I knew that I could operate as a public servant by going to law school and hopefully getting a job in public service. And in law school, I knew I wanted to be a prosecutor. And at the time I graduated in 2013, one of the only openings to be a prosecutor was in Beadle County. And I'm currently working for Mike Moore, the state's attorney who's here today. But my dream was always to come back here and be the state's attorney in Brookings County. Ever since I left law school, I knew I wanted to come back here to my community with you all and be fortunate enough to be your state's attorney. And in the 3 years that I've been the deputy state's attorney in Beadle County, I've realized that it isn't so much, every day we prosecute. We get police reports that come in, we bring them into court, and that's oftentimes where a lot of prosecutors' influence ends. But some of the biggest differences that we can make in bringing crime down and making an impact in our community is the things that are happening outside of the courtroom. Are we engaging the community to making sure that the felony offenders, the parolees, the people committing first-time offenses, are we doing enough to make sure that they're not coming back into the system? Recidivism is truly the question, I think, in every state's attorney's election. And with crime, the highest it's been in the last 5 years here in Brookings, I think the question facing you all voters is, are we doing enough to curb the crime? And I don't think that's happening right now. And that's why I'm asking for your vote on November 8th, because I'm committed to being a leader inside the courtroom and outside the courtroom.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Abby?
The Brookings County State's Attorney's Office is not one that you hear about often. It's not. We're not out looking for headlines. We're not out scheduling public meetings and public press conferences. What we are doing is working away steadfastly every single day with law enforcement to protect you and keep the safety of this community as stable as it has been for the past 42 years. And Dan is right. Every 4 years, you have the chance to decide who you want as your next state's attorney. And for the past 42 of those years, every election cycle, whether it was contested or not, you elected Clyde Calhoun because you trusted under his guidance and leadership that we would keep safe. And although our numbers rise because the population rises, and with that inherently crime rises, we were still voted or determined to be the #1 safest college town in America. That is outstanding. What Clyde has taught me in my time at the state's attorney's office is that you don't let party politics get in the way of the work that we do. You have a commitment to the safety of this community, a commitment to being fair and ethical, and to serving this community to the best of your ability. For me, this isn't just a job. This is a way of life. My family, my friends, my coworkers that are here today will tell you that this job doesn't stop at 5 o'clock. This job is 24 hours, 7 days a week, and whether I'm on vacation, whether it's in the middle of the night, or whether you're anywhere in the world, you answer that call because the work is that important. Now, anybody that knows me, I think will tell you that I am a leader. I'm a leader in the office and I'm a leader in the community. I've been out working on boards, volunteering my time, spreading the word and the awareness about what we do, and having those tough conversations with the agencies we work with, because that is how you make a difference in this community. That's how you stay ahead of the game. And that's what we're doing right now. Throughout this forum, you've heard a lot of information. But I think what I've told you is about the work that we actually do at the state's attorney's office, the work that happens on a day-to-day basis, and how I plan to continue that. Because I have the knowledge, the experience, and the leadership to guide this office. I have been here working for you, working with you, and I would like to continue working for years to come.
Thank you, Abby. I want to thank both of our candidates today for coming out and allowing you to become more familiar with them. I also want to thank, on behalf of the Brookings Area Chamber of Commerce and the Government Affairs Committee, all of you for coming out and participating in this democratic event. And I will remind you that this forum is being broadcast on Mediacom Channel 9 and Swiftel Communications and ITC channels, and will be replayed again tonight from 9 to 10:30 p.m. and Sunday from 2 to 3:30 p.m. and Monday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Thank you all and have a great weekend.